Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri, and this is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing bringing you up to date on all you need to know on the US-Israel war with Iran. Well, let's begin with some of today's key developments. President Trump backs down over his threat to impose a 20% charge on ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. It follows another round of strikes and counter-strikes as the US continues its battle to break Iran's hold on the crucial waterway. Iran's Gulf neighbours bear the brunt of its retaliatory attacks, with strikes reported in Kuwait, Bahrain and Jordan. Oil prices recover after Mr. Trump's announcement as shipping traffic in the Strait of Hormuz slows to a 2-month low. Well, the battle between the United States and Iran for control of the Strait of Hormuz continues. Explosions have been reported in multiple Iranian cities around the key waterway, now contested by both sides. Strikes near the port cities of Bandar Abbas and Bushehr, the site of Iran's only civilian nuclear power plant, follow a night of reciprocal attacks, with the US saying it hit military sites across the country in a 5-hour mission. Iranian forces say they hit and disabled 2 supertankers in the Strait of Hormuz. 1 crew member was killed and 8 others wounded. Jordan, Kuwait and Bahrain reported Iranian strikes on several US facilities in their territory, with Gulf nations again saying they intercepted aerial attacks. This all comes a day after US President Donald Trump promised to hit Iran very hard, reinstating a US blockade of Iranian ports. Set to take effect on Tuesday, the blockade will stop Iran's ships or customers from entering or leaving the Strait of Hormuz through the Gulf of Oman. Well, on Monday, the president said he would be imposing a 20% charge on all cargo shipped through the strait. But in the last few hours, some 24 hours since that announcement, he posted this on Truth Social. He said, "Based on highly productive conversations with Middle East leadership, I have decided to replace the 20% United States reimbursement fee with trade and investment deals that the various Gulf states will be making into the United States." Well, Mr. Trump is hosting the Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi at the White House, a meeting in which the issue of Iran dominated discussions. Have a listen to what he had to say.
I don't like the concept of a fee, but at the same time, it's not fair that we're protecting this strait for the entire world, for China and everyone. I don't mind protecting it for China. I don't mind protecting it for anybody, but it's unfair that we're not in somehow compensated.
Well, let's cross live and speak to Chief North America correspondent Gary O'Donoghue. Gary, the president's changed his mind about that 20% toll. So what exactly is going on here? Where do we stand?
Well, it's kind of as you were as of 24 hours ago. The president is still going ahead with imposing the blockade on Iranian ports and Iranian shipping. That kicks in about 2.5 hours' time. The plan to impose this 20% charge on cargo, as he put it, that's gone away within 24 hours. He's been persuaded, it seems, by concerns here in Washington, but also, in his own words, by discussions with Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region who didn't want to see those tariffs, not surprisingly. And he says they're going to get inward investment from those countries instead. Nothing very definite on that, but a complete reversal. They call it plays into this whole idea that that President Trump doesn't always follow through on some of his threats. They have a word for it, don't they, in the markets here? TACO, Trump always chickens out.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Well, Iran's military has warned it would respond if the US naval blockade is reinstated. President Trump accused Tehran of violating its preliminary agreement with Washington because, in his words, there was something in the deal they didn't like. He was referring to Clause 5 in the Memorandum of Understanding, which says the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. Well, Iran has insisted that all traffic must receive its prior approval and pass through a designated route along the Iranian coast, one of 3 maritime routes through that narrow strait. With me here in the studio is BBC Persian Siavash Ardalan. Siavash, a lot of space for interpretation in terms of that clause. What is it that the Iranians and the US are not seeing eye to eye on as far as this memorandum is concerned?
Well, in the memorandum, it says that Iran, with the cooperation of Oman, they will have discussions to determine the future of the arrangements that will govern the maritime shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. That's what's been, disputed between Iran and the US. While the discussions were going on in that 60-day space that was given between the two countries, what the Iranians are saying is that the U.S. decided to open up an alternative route very close to the coast of Oman for the shipping to go through that route, thereby reducing Iran's leverage and control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran felt that this is a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding, and it was written with ambiguities anyway, not just on the Strait of Hormuz, but on other issues as well. But particularly in the Strait of Hormuz, it was just a matter of time before the two sides would have clashed over this.
So where does this leave things now then? What are the Iranians thinking at this very moment, do you think?
Iranians are discussing worst-case scenarios in a lot of these strategy forums. Many of them are thinking the flare-up of the conflict between the two sides. U.S.'s relentless attacks over the past 4 days against Iran's military assets on the southern coast is a prelude possibly to a ground invasion or the occupation of one of Iran's islands. They are preparing for worst-case scenarios, but they are hoping that by trying to fire at ships and deter shipping from the Strait of Hormuz, not to allow U.S. to take control of that strait. And this is apparently what President Trump is trying very hard in his own turn to avoid as well, not to allow Iran to have control. So really, it's a war over control of the Strait of Hormuz. And
control over that strait is something that Iran is not ever going to be willing to give up now that it's discovered that it has this level of power that it didn't have before.
Absolutely. Many are
the intelligence that the US have
even now become more crucial to Iran's long-term strategy than the nuclear program. So what many analysts are saying, no matter what the US does, no matter how much it strikes Iran, it just takes one little drone to hit a ship, for insurance companies to withdraw their coverage for ships, for the whole, shipping flow of oil and other goods to be disrupted. And as we see in the past 2-3 days, hardly any ships have gone through the Strait of Hormuz. So this is not something that Iran will give up at any cost. So really what they're saying is the U.S. has to come up with another plan other than brute force.
Okay, Siavash, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Now, let's move on to the region and the impact regionally, because Bahrain, Jordan and the United Arab Emirates are among Iran's Gulf neighbours to be hit as Tehran retaliates to this latest round of US strikes. The UAE has condemned Iran for what it called a brazen attack on its supertankers in Omani waters. Well, India has also sharply criticised Iran for the strikes, which resulted in the death of 2 seafarers, one of them from India. 8 others were injured, 6 of whom are Indian and 2 Ukrainians. The BBC's Arunaday Mukherjee has the latest reaction from Delhi.
We know that there were 12 Indians on the Al Bahia. 1 was killed and another was injured. Now, there were 18 Indians on board the Mombasa, of which 9 sustained injuries, including 2 who are in a serious condition. As a result of this, earlier in the day, India summoned a senior diplomat from Iran posted in Delhi to lodge what it said was a strong protest against these attacks. In a statement, India said it condemned the attacks targeting seafarers, which disrupted free and safe navigation through international waterways like the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is not the first instance of Indian casualties. Earlier on in June as well, 3 Indian sailors were killed after the US military struck a tanker in the Gulf of Oman, which it had accused of violating its blockade on Iranian ports. India had at that time also summoned a senior US diplomat to lodge a strong protest. Now, these killings once again highlight how developments in West Asia continue to impact countries far and wide, even if they're not directly involved in the conflict. In that same statement, India has again said that they urge dialogue. They've always tried to walk a tightrope in this conflict. It's been very cautious so far and has not openly condemned US action in strong terms so far. They have said they are following developments very closely and once again want the warring sides to come to the talking table and advocate a de-escalation de-escalation, saying that the differences between both sides must be solved through dialogue and diplomacy.
Well, Tehran insisted only targets US interests in the region, but a military spokesman said any collaboration by Gulf countries with Washington will be considered an act of war. Well, let's speak to BBC Arabic Saeed Shahata. And Saeed, how much of a threat are these latest strikes to stability in the region?
It is very alarming because the Gulf countries have been paying a heavy price since the war in 28th of February. And there is a question mark about the ability of the United States to protect the Gulf countries after what happened to them, because they lost people, they were killed, people were killed in the Gulf, people were injured, infrastructure were hit. They lost billions of dollars of the infrastructure were hit, especially the gas oil field in Al Masal in Qatar. So there is many problems. So after, the Gulf puts their trust in the United States, they question it now. And talking with some politicians from the Gulf, they are questioning the ability of the US to protect them, because after 1990s, after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, they lost trust in what's called the common Arab defense. So they put after that their trust in the United States. They still trust the United States, but the air defense system they are intercepting the missiles and drones, but it's still affecting the Gulf countries. So the stability of the Gulf countries under scrutiny because of the strikes of Iran. So they need protection from the Iran threats. They didn't have that from the Arab defense after the Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990s. And nowadays, there is question mark. The United States try to get more money from the Gulf in investment. As Mr. Trump said, he will waive the 20% charge he announced it recently in order for investment and trade of the Gulf in the United States. But the Gulf countries with instability, with this, ships going the Strait of Hormuz, it will affecting the money we'll get from the oil and gas. So in this case, it will be problematic for the Gulf countries. So the only solution for that is to end the war between Iran and the United States. But the Hormuz is a big problem between them. Iran wants to use this as a bargaining card, not only for now, but for the future. And they put, conditions. And the Americans, they cannot, with using the force to stop Iran, because Iran has still the ability to hit any ship. And this is what happened over the last few days. American retaliated by striking different places in Iran, but this didn't stop Iran. So even Iran was this struck very hard, but it still is very, very crucial that the United States give, guarantees for the Gulf in order to not to see any strikes again against the states and affecting their economy.
Saeed, thank you for that. So what is the impact of all of this on the global economy? Well, oil prices have begun to recover in the last few minutes since Mr. Trump's announcement that he's dropping the Strait of Hormuz toll. They had spiked earlier in the day, but the latest shipping data shows that traffic has slowed to a 2-month low. Well, let's talk to our business correspondent, Mark Ashdown now. Mark, what are the oil markets thinking right now? Do they even know what to think?
I'm not sure they do, actually. I mean, yeah, another day of interesting movements, as you say there. This plan from Donald Trump to impose 20% tariffs potentially contributed to, really, a spike in the oil price. It reached about $87 a barrel earlier in the day in early trading. It did ease off, though, as you say, towards the end of the day after Trump softened his language, said he wouldn't be pursuing that plan. So I think traders really a bit weary, I suppose, of all this. They hear this combative rhetoric from both sides, but I think in their minds they feel that the best course of action remains a deal for both sides. So we saw in early trading today, the FTSE, for example, and the indexes around Europe dropped off, but only to about 1% down. And we saw some pretty wild swings, remember, back a few months ago when war broke out, more like sort of 5-10%. And then the same sort of swings back up when peace seemed a possibility. So I think really traders holding their breath, holding off at the moment and waiting to see. The hope, I think, is that this can get resolved quickly. That's why we didn't see such a major reaction today.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now bring ourselves to our final thought for the programme. Let's cross live and speak to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. And Lise, this memorandum of understanding that we talked about earlier feels very much more like a memorandum of misunderstanding between the two countries. Where do we go from here?
Yes, this dispute over the control over the Strait of Hormuz, which we have to keep emphasizing, is a dispute that was created by this war. The strait was open and functioning normally with the free flow of traffic before the war was unleashed by Israel and the United States on February the 28th. And now, as you've been hearing in this program from our various correspondents, is that Iran has now decided that it will never return to the status quo ante, that it will always maintain some kind of presence. What kind of control still remains to be seen, because countries like Oman, which Iran insisted be included in this memorandum of understanding, has its own ideas about this crucial waterway and had been allowing some U.S. vessels to go through its southern coastline. And those vessels did come under attack by Iran. And Iran and Oman, long-standing traditional allies, are now struggling to come to some kind of an understanding over how they can move forward in this strait. But Mary, it's just one example of the wording, the vague wording in a hastily drafted deal, which allows both sides, all sides, to see in it what they want to read. Iran sees in clause 5 of a 14-paragraph agreement, giving it that Iran will now make arrangements using its best efforts to restore the free flow of traffic. And as we heard from our colleague, Iran has interpreted that it does indeed have control over the management of the strait, whereas the United States reads that same paragraph as saying that Iran has to completely open the traffic through the waterway. I was speaking yesterday to some oil executives, some Arab oil executives working in the region, and they said you could drive a truck through that drafting. And so this is what is imperiling this ever so fragile memorandum.
So where does the answer lie, Lise? Because at the moment, it just feels like as someone I spoke to, an analyst I spoke to earlier said, there's fighting and talking, talking and fighting. How much longer can this mix last?
From the very beginning, it's to use the phrase, a no war, no peace scenario, not an all-out war, but not a permanent peace. And I know from speaking to some of the Arab mediators, they're becoming exasperated by this state of affairs. And in the last 24 hours, it did seem, Marianne, that the region was tipping more into a war, with President Trump again going to Congress to ask for a return to war. I think the general idea, and we've said this many times, is neither side wants to return to an all-out confrontation, but both sides believe they have the upper hand, and neither side wants to back down, believing their enemy in this confrontation is the weaker side and will eventually give in. President Trump is facing the pressure of the midterm elections. The clock is ticking. Oil prices, as we've been hearing, have gone up again. Markets have been affected, but Iran has its own pressures. I know from having been there recently, the economic and financial crisis is dire, a staggering 80% inflation, millions of job losses, not just through this war. And we should emphasize 2 wars in less than a year, but also through what was one of the largest digital shutdowns in history. But Iran has made it clear this fault line is a big, bright red line, and it will not cross it.
Lise, thank you very much indeed. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thanks for your time. That's all from the Iran War Today.